Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks what atheists should be doing next in a godless world.
As we've talked about before in the podcast, non-religious people are a growing demographic in the United States and around the world. But questions remain about how we, as atheists, build a community and remake society as non-believers as we become the dominant demographic. This is especially challenging because the growth in irreligion hasn't occurred evenly, and the cost of leaving a faith vary greatly from community to community. The consequences for coming out as an atheist can be profound, from the loss of social capital, a career, friendship, to even being rejected from one's own family. Thankfully, we are joined today by someone who has been building a space for the godless for over a decade. Mandisa Thomas is the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, a nonprofit organization that provides fellowship, comfort, and community for their members and allies in the struggle. Mandisa, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much, Mandisa, for coming on and taking the time to talk with us. I guess to start, why don't we just talk about your background and were you brought up religious, and how did your sort of religious upbringing or lack thereof inform your later career?
Absolutely. So I probably have talked about my background for probably at least more than about a couple of hundred times over these past
Okay.
few years, past 10 years. But for those of you who aren't familiar with me, I am a New York City native, born and raised. I will be 45 this year. And unlike many in the Black community, I actually wasn't formally raised religious. I consider myself fortunate to have had a very, very diverse background. Both of my parents made a conscious decision that they didn't want my brothers and I to be raised in a Christian environment. Now, I was raised in what was, considered a woke environment. So I was raised in like the Black conscious community. I learned a lot about Black history and culture growing up. I learned the meanings of my names. My parents came out of that era in the 1970s where there was a huge push for Black consciousness. Now, if you remember, in the 1960s and 70s. It was right after the Civil Rights Movement, the time of the Black Panthers. So there, and so there was there was a conscious effort among many in the Black community to try to identify with Afrocentricity and Black pride, and to be a counterculture as to the Eurocentric narrative. Many of my peers and I, and some of my family members, were named African names. My mother was very, very particular that my brothers and I knew what our names meant, that they had meaning, and that there was a focus on Black centered education that we learned. I always say that I learned who Malcolm X was before Martin Luther King.
All right.
So yeah, that was my childhood. That was my upbringing. And with that being said, I learned early on about how Christianity in particular was imposed, for lack of a better word, on the enslaved, when they were trafficked over to the Western Hemisphere. So my childhood, I would say, was very, very rooted again in education, and it was pretty heavy. But I also am a classically trained singer, and I grew up. I had a voice instructor, and I would sing in various churches as a child. So it was from there that I sort of, had this I had this sort of outsider's view to Christianity in particular, but it wasn't lost on me, the contrast or the contradiction between God being a loving God, but then also a jealous God. And, I just could never reconcile that belief. It always seemed so very restrictive. And I also, my mother was also very, very particular about taking my brothers and I to the library. So I read a lot, which did include reading different forms of mythology. So I read about different gods as a kid, and began to compare and contrast. What the difference was between the Greek gods, the African gods, and the Christian or Judeo-Christian gods. So I decided early on that I just would never be a Christian. And I mean, there were times where I might have felt like I wanted to join a church, or I consider myself spiritual for a while, but it just never like this need to fundamentally believe or belong to any religious institution just never it just never sat with me. I just never caught on. It just never caught on. So later on, as I started a family and we moved to Georgia, it became a bit isolating because one of the first questions that you're asked is, "What church do you go to?"
Yeah. Oh, okay. Mandisa, there's so much there that I want to talk about, and I definitely want to hear about the difference between New York City and Georgia. But to back it up a little bit, in your upbringing, were you raised were you raised atheist? Were you raised spiritual? Did your parents put a name to it?
No, there
Or
wasn't really a name to it. I just, we weren't really raised in Christian, we weren't raised religious per se. Now I remember attending quite a few gatherings that were hosted by the 5% Nation of Islam in New York as a child as well. So I had that exposure to Christianity through singing in churches. My younger brother's dad was like a 5%er, so we would go to these gatherings that they called show and proves up in Harlem.
so wait,
And
what were the 5%ers?
they were a sect of Islam that kind of broke off from the Nation of Islam.
Okay. All right.
And
So like
so, they
Malcolm X's church, or
well, yeah,
Elijah Muhammad before him.
yes,
Elijah
so
Muhammad and
Elijah Muhammad, yeah, their institution, if you will, the institution of Islam. These are they were actually some mostly guys, because as most religions are, they're very male driven and patriarchal. And so these were guys who called themselves gods, and the women were the earths. It was just, it was very much rooted in this idea that, that 5% of, the people, would be, I guess, Allah's chosen people. And so it was very much more of a urban sort of a street version of Islam. There are a lot of rap artists who subscribe to the 5% doctrine. It's very the different, the variations of religion in the Black community are very, very interesting. So it is cult like most religions are. But what was interesting was that, of course, there was a deviation from this image of a white god, unlike Christianity, which had been forced on the Black community. So for this particular denomination, it was more of, the Black man is God, similar to the Nation of Islam, and they just kind of threw in their own teachings. But they would have activities for the children. It would be a talent show. It was definitely community based, but it was, again, cult like as well. So yeah, it was a very, very interesting experience growing up.
And so, what was your perspective before you moved to Georgia? Like, what did this growing up without a religion? but around all of these religions. What was your perspective? What was your insight? What did you think or like know about religion? What did you learn from that?
Well, like I said previously, I knew that from my interactions with family members and acquaintances who were Christian, that I just didn't really want to be a Christian. It was always, again, it was so confining. It was the exact opposite of being educated and learning, and I actually enjoyed reading various subjects. I was a history buff growing up, and so I loved reading about different facts, and I also love reading fictional literature as well. So I always sort of knew, like in the back of my mind, that just the teachings of Christianity in particular was just something that I never wanted to really experience closely. But for a while, I considered myself to be spiritual and not religious. Growing up in a Afrocentric household, and in most Black households, there is a sense of subscribing to, like, there's ancestor worship. You have there are other cultural gods, and so there was still this idea that believing in some sort of spirit is inherent to Black life. And so we had to subscribe to some sense of spirituality, whether it was a divine entity or the spirits of our ancestors. It was something sort of lofty that gave many Black people a sense of connection to the history and the culture that was lost over the years of having been enslaved in this country. So I grew up. As I got older, I sort of subscribed to that. I remember the first time I was asked if I was atheist, because I was also very outspoken about what I learned about the institutional racism and injustice. So yeah, I was very loud and outspoken about that. And I remember one of my classmates, when I got to high school, I was asked if I was atheist, and I asked what that meant. And I was told that I didn't believe in heaven or hell. And for a while, I thought, yeah, that sounds like me, because I could never reconcile this notion of an afterlife. I always thought in my mind, well, there's no evidence of a God. There's no evidence of anyone coming back from the dead. So how could I how could I take comfort in this idea of heaven when there's no evidence? So even when I was young, that weighed heavy on my mind. But through my teenage and young adult years, I would say I was spiritual but not religious, because I never wanted to claim any religion. But I sort of resolved myself in this idea that, well, there's some sort of entity looking out for us. I would say there was a creator, some of that lofty spirit, that lofty spiritual language. I would subscribe to that, but definitely nothing hardcore, no human-like being. And
Right.
I
Yeah,
definitely didn't
yeah,
believe in
yeah.
that.
When did the
Yeah.
spiritualism go away?
I would say because there was a point in time in my life where I just really didn't think about it. I just knew that I did not want to belong to any church. I just knew that, I mean, to be a Christian to me was just not it wasn't a standard of morality, because some of the meanest people I knew were Christians. So I think I would use it at my convenience over the years. I certainly I did not practice. My family and I did not we didn't do any rituals or anything related to anything spiritual. So I just it would intermittently come over the years, cross my mind. uh but I think it really went away at the end of the 2000s decade, when I really started to examine and reassess my thoughts about religion, and where I stood when it came to the God concept, because I wasn't ready to say that there was absolutely no God or spiritual entity during those years. I had just hadn't thought about it. But then when I really, really did start to reflect and start to come to make a decision on that, it just really started to once again weigh heavy on my mind as things had over the years.
So was that in Georgia?
It was in Georgia, and Atlanta is a very interesting place. It isn't a little New York, but it is a metropolitan city. So church isn't the only activity that you can get into. There's a lot of activities here. There's a lot of things to do, and we sort of we ventured out. We got to my family and I got to know other people, but there is still a very heavy religious presence here, influence here in the area. You have Creflo Dollar with the World Changers Ministries, and Bishop Eddie Long at the time. So it is a land of mega pastors, and along with the many things to do here, you still have your people who go to church faithfully every Sunday. But I would say that my transition definitely came when I was in Georgia, and as my family grew, because my husband and we did not want to. I mean, we have religious family members and friends, but we didn't want to go to anyone's church. We didn't want to feel like we absolutely had to belong to a religious community in order for our kids to feel like they could have a community, because we realized that there are ways you can build community. You can build community out of anything, but we certainly did not want that to be the premise or the basis of how we convened with others.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the questions we're sort of interested in exploring on the podcast, like how to build community sort of outside religion. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I guess this you start Black Nonbelievers, and it's about 10 years ago, I guess, about
Yes, in
mhm,
2011.
right.
And
Okay.
mhm. And it actually started from me researching a Black atheist meetup that was supposed to take place. I remember on December 25th of 2010, I fully re-identified as an atheist after finding a Black atheist group on Facebook and becoming more acquainted with others online. And so there was a post about a Black atheist meeting in the Atlanta area, and I tried to find it and couldn't really find any more information on it. And so I joined Meetup, and also started talking with more Black atheists that I met online who started describing their experiences with in-person events with predominantly white groups.
Ah, okay, right.
And so, I heard, I would hear time and time again that they would hear, well, I never met a Black atheist. And the conversations would take a bad turn very quickly. They would become very uncomfortable. And so I thought, well, I was idealistic at the time, being new to the community. I was excited about attending my first meetup with all atheists. I said, well, we're all atheists here. Perhaps we could find some common ground, and perhaps that won't be an issue here. And when I got to the meetup, sure enough, there was someone who said, well, I never met a Black atheist.
Right,
and,
right.
and interestingly enough, there was one other Black atheist who attended the meetup. And while it was good, there was good conversations. When it came to discussing the challenges that, Black atheists face, the conversation became very tense, and there were some people there who got defensive to say that there wasn't much of a difference. And so we're like, well, we're the only two Black people here,
Right,
among
right,
among all of these other people. And not to say that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but all you have to do is kind of look in the room and tell that there is, there's clearly, an imbalance. So it was at the end of that particular gathering that I spoke to the other black guy that was there, and I said, we're in Atlanta. It's a largely black city. There has to be more of us out here. Perhaps they just don't know how to find others. Perhaps there is just when they come to these meetups and they have this experience, they don't want to come back because they're either dismissed or in some way, tokenized. So it was decided then that we would start a local group in Atlanta that helped build community for and increase the networking for Black atheists to meet in person, and to have an organized effort to meet regularly, to have regular activities, and also connect with other local organizations so that we could increase our presence and also speak up. Because at that time, I was very, very serious about being openly and vocal about my atheism because I felt it was important. Because I remember what that did for me, and having people actually people in my life close to me try to discourage me from speaking about it, and which only, which only like pissed me off and make me want to do it more.
Right,
So
right.
Uh,
yeah.
I think Nathan and I have both had those sort of interactions with people, atheists who are very dismissive of other atheists. But I'm really super curious as to what particular needs are overlooked, particularly for the Black community, but also for like the difference between the Northeast and Georgia. Some of the interactions I've had with very dismissive atheists who typically, and not to slag on you, Mandisa, that it was ones who were raised without religion. This was
Right.
a big distinction I noticed. People who were raised without religion seem to be very dismissive, or at least like much more blasé. Like they didn't have a cost associated with leaving a faith, I think is the thing.
Right.
And for a lot of people, a lot of the people I met, there were some like Mormons leaving the faith is just, it's almost like social death.
Mhm.
People from the South who were lost all of their social network, and other people. I had one friend who came out to his family as an atheist, and every year his parents would try to get his brother to fight him.
Mhm.
So, so
Mm.
so this is one part I'm thinking about. Was there that difference, especially in something like Georgia, where it's every Sunday? From what you've said, it's still a big part of what you do socially.
When you are a person of color, especially coming from the Black community, no matter, even though I consider myself fortunate, I wasn't raised with religion, but in the Black community, you cannot escape it. And also, when we're also talking about a segment of the population that is extremely religious and also institutionally still dealing with other factors pertaining to racial justice, economic injustice, and just all of these barriers and all of these societal stigmas. Even when you're raised without religion, you cannot escape some form of disparity, or in some way. And even though I wasn't raised religious, I know all too well what it is like to have an opinion or perspective that does not go over well with the majority, which can be very, very isolating. And I think any atheist that is dismissive of that as being disingenuous and being dishonest. But for those of us who come from marginalized communities, and again having to deal with these other institutional factors on top of encountering and dealing with a very largely religious community where the identity is so tied into the religion that if you leave the religion behind, you're being accused you're accused of rejecting, your blackness. You're accused of rejecting your culture. You're accused of rejecting, the struggles that the community has gone through, which is so ironic, considering how,
Yeah, yeah,
considering how our ancestors and many became to be Christian in the first place. But we're dealing with those factors on top of that. And yes, there are many non-black atheists and non people of color who don't have to consider those perspectives. So, it's like once you leave the God concept behind, what's next after that? And also, how do we consider the fact that our atheism and our humanism is already intersectional, because we find that many within the black community, even though they talk about liberation and overcoming struggles, still attribute that to religion and God. But those of us who are non-religious do not attribute it to that at all. And in fact, we challenge that narrative. So there is a lot that regarding the racial justice aspect that many atheists is still a very tense topic. It's still it's still very uncomfortable for a lot of white people to address and confront, because that is an aspect that they never had to think about, or very seldom, about how this impacts how everyday life and these institutional factors impact the black community and other people of color. And so it's a privilege to have never had to consider that, what that means for us. And I don't come from economic privilege. I come from the projects. I come from a single parent household. I say my parents, but I was out of it. My parents split, so I was raised in a single parent home. So I am that statistic, that many people would. So I'm not your average. I am sort of your average atheist, but I'm not the average atheist who may have, a college degree, or someone who might quote one of your more well-known atheist scholars, if you will. So our perspectives and also our methods are
yeah.
vary.
Oh yeah, this is something we've noticed and commented on a bunch, that like it's such a lonely road to get to atheism, right? Everyone who does
Hmm.
it seems to do it on their own. And yet when you get there, it's a room full of white guys, which is
Hmm.
not surprising. Yeah.
Right. But the one thing that I consider myself fortunate, again, with my upbringing, is learning about those who resisted, learning early on about blacks who challenged religion and the religious narrative. So there's a history of that many aren't aware of, or they tend to forget. And so, that is one thing that I'm very and that the organization is very serious about, is informing the general public, and whether they are, believers in the black community or other atheists, that there is a history of religious dissent in the black community, even if it isn't as widely known as it should be. So we exist also to disrupt that narrative, and that is something that we are very, very serious about, because it is very, very important for people to know.
Yeah, and let's get into that part of the overcoming, because like you, it seems that we definitely share this experience of like questioning and doubting and thinking it through and investigating on our own and coming to these conclusions. But what most people don't do is start a group to actually overcome this stuff, which you've been doing. So tell us about like how this organization has been educating. What else do the Black non-believers do for the community? How do you forge a community?
Absolutely. So my and it's interesting because there are, the word community is thrown around quite a bit. And there are a number of people who, say they want to be a part of a community and build community, but actually don't know how to do it. So my background, and my skill set in my line of work is in hospitality and also in events. So at the time that we started Black Nonbelievers locally to the Atlanta area, I was the event services manager at the Centers for Disease Control's conference center at the main campus right next to Emory University. And so one thing that was very, very important was that we established a consistent schedule of in person events. So we started with our general meetings where we would have discussions. We also started connecting with other people that we knew. For example, Jeremiah Kamara, who produced the documentaries Contradiction and Holy Hierarchy, which are available on Amazon Prime. I connected with him prior to starting Black Nonbelievers, but also again we were very, very careful to establish relationships with other organizations and collaborative efforts. For example, we connected with Recovering from Religion very early. I attended my first American Atheist Convention in 2011. So we started doing our research and started speaking with other local groups in the Atlanta area. In addition to starting our own, to developing the organization and starting to do, facilitate meetings. And we also made connections with a local radio station, where one of the co-hosts is an atheist as well. So, in forging these relationships and having these conversations, we were able to establish a consistent presence in the Atlanta area, which eventually grew nationwide. We also established a social media presence. We created a private group on Facebook for people to find us. We created a group on Meetup so that people could stay connected to our events. We created our website. We eventually got established as a nonprofit organization. So putting in the work that is tedious at
Mhm.
times. Most of the time,
Right.
and being consistent with it is what was truly important. And I really do I really have my in my skills in hospitality and coordinating and organizing. Those skills help tremendously because the ability to connect with people and to be tactful, and there's nothing wrong with us being hospitable and nice to people. You
Right.
have to know
Yes.
how to talk to
Yeah.
Yeah.
folks. You have to
Mhm.
know how to you have to know how to speak the language of everyday people. And it doesn't have to mean that you're using all of these words that people can't understand. It's about talking to people and not at them. And so that was something that unique at the time that I knew we were bringing to the table that other organizations, many organizations were similar to, but not like we were. So I think that was we just didn't want to be another black organization that was espousing this Eurocentric idea of what it meant to be an atheist. So we're bringing the black experience into Black Nonbelievers because that is where we come from. I am a product of the black community. And so, we really wanted to make sure we brought that. And much of what we do is very similar to what other organizations do. And I really want to be clear on that. There are a lot of things that we do very similarly. I would say that there definitely are some differences in how we do things. And there's also a focus on uplifting and amplifying the voices of Black atheists and also centering Black atheist content because there is a lot out there that doesn't get recognized. There are quite a few organizers that do not get the due and the recognition that they deserve. And so we took that very seriously, that we were actually going to center and uplift the black voices in particular.
One thing I was curious about is who's joining your group. For example, I mean, I'm wondering about, the age, like, is it
Hmm.
mostly more younger people that are joining? And also I'm wondering about like the gender balance that you see.
Absolutely. So when we first started, I would say most of our members are like Gen X. I'm a Gen Xer. So most of us are in that age between mid 30s to mid 40s, but we actually have a range of members. We have quite a few members of who I like to call of a mature age.
All
So
right. Yeah.
we have some older members
Hmm.
who were they were raised religious, or they were just silent about their non-belief for years, but they never said anything until they encountered us. We do have some younger folks in the organization as well, but for most of our members are of are in my age range, mid 30s to mid 40s, those who are in between, if you will. And also, when we first got started, there were a lot of men involved, and there still are, but now it's about 50-50 between, men and women. We're also very, very conscious of and very welcoming and supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. Many of our organizers, including myself, identify as LGBTQ. I am pansexual. So we started that from the beginning, that we are welcoming to everyone, regardless of your gender identity, your sexual identity. That was something that we implemented from the start. And so there wasn't we weren't going to allow anyone who was either a separatist or anyone who was homophobic into our organization. So but yes, the balance between men and women is closing on that. So I would say that like I said, it's almost 50-50. It's about 60-40, 60% men, 40% women. And there's definitely a diverse there we have, of course, a large contingent of LGBTQ members, LGBTQ plus members within our organization. That was very intentional from the start.
Do you guys do a lot of outreach?
So yes, we do. As a matter of fact, we just finished tabling at the Juneteenth celebration here in Atlanta, which was downtown in Centennial Park. All of our meetings are open to the general public. The flagship meetup, which is here in Atlanta, it is a public group, and so anyone is allowed to participate. Until they show themselves. Unwilling or incapable of doing otherwise. And also, like I said, we table at different events. We do a lot of interviews. We've been interviewed for a number of media outlets. For example, we were interviewed for CBS Sunday Morning years ago. We were interviewed for CNN. We also collaborate with other organizations. For example, for the Secular Week of Action, we teamed up with we volunteered with the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance on their which is an environmental justice environmental organization. And so we lent our hands to their service projects. And so we do a number of things. Yes, we try to table as much as possible. Many of us, when we are outdoors, we wear our shirts. If there are any questions that we are asked, we encourage people as much as possible to state their position, and we encourage each other on how to do so, objectively, and in a way that they don't feel like they have to, we don't have to feel like we're being put on the defensive. So yeah, there are a number of things that we do for outreach, and I like to, I consider outreach doing anything in the public that shows that we are an organization, we are an existing organization.
One of the things Todd and I have been thinking about sort of on the podcast is like exactly what non-religious organizations like should be doing. And it sort of seems like
Uh,
groups can
Anti-religious
be
organizations.
sorry?
or anti-religious
Yeah, yeah,
organizations.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
So like are they providing a sense of community for people? Like is that their primary goal? Or is it more about advocacy for different policies, like a sort of a secular group?
Right.
Or is it about sort of giving almost like propaganda, sort of quote unquote, like to
Right, or even to fight
yeah,
in
right,
some ways
exactly.
with
Yeah,
believers.
yeah.
So,
Mhm,
yeah, so I think that there are one group can have multiple missions
mhm, mhm.
and they can serve, they can do one or more of those things. So for Black nonbelievers, I would say we are definitely a community organization where we are trying to reach those who have felt isolated, they felt alone, and they are looking for other like-minded networking and socialization. We definitely provide that, and we are an advocacy organization. We make our voices heard in spaces where we know they are needed, and we also speak on issues that pertain, excuse me, to the Black community. And we also support other initiatives. We realize that some of our members are active members of other organizations. They may volunteer or belong to other nonprofit organizations, and whose missions may somewhat align but not necessarily be the same. Our mission in being open, and encouraging other people to speak up aligns with advocacy, and we are a strong advocate for state church separation. Anything that we see that violates that, we encourage our members to speak up about. And then, we also try to provide, again, a community need. I would say that we are a place of refuge for many non-believers, especially many Black atheists who are surrounded by religious family members and friends, and they have nowhere else to turn.
So, is there a common experience for them when you have new members come in, or the members that you have? Do they have a common experience with coming out? Are there identical problems, or is it a separate road for everyone?
So there are many members whose journeys align. They're very similar, but then some are different, right? Like for example, my experience is that, I didn't have to let go of a church home. I didn't have to leave a church. I didn't have to leave fundamental religion behind. So that wasn't a struggle for me, but for others it is. Others are still very, very active, or they're still very involved with their religious family members and friends. And we have some members whose either spouses or they are still actively employed or actively involved with their churches. And some members have had to lie about where they're going. Some members, their spouses or significant others have shared a fear about them attending our meetings because they're afraid that they'll either be struck by lightning or something bad will happen to them. And others are so surrounded in their homes or in their respective communities by religious people that it's extremely overwhelming. And in the Black community, where there is a church, pretty much a church on every corner, or almost every aspect of their lives in some way revolves around religion in the church, which also is reflected in entertainment, in politics, in all of those things. It is extremely overwhelming, and also because it has become sort of like pop culture in a Black community. You're raised in the church, and there are, there's a saying, the music is better. The gospel. People love gospel
Right.
music. They love the culture and the entertainment of gospel music, and what the Black church resembles. And it has become just this big phenomenon, more than what you would see in your predominantly white churches. So it has become sort of like this cultural element to the Black community that is so much harder to break free from, because there's a root in there are many, there are many educational institutions that were started by churches and by religious people, and so it is so ingrained into the fabric of the Black community in particular that it is extremely hard to overcome.
Mhm. Do you think, have you noticed it's become easier since the time you started the Black Nonbelievers? Like, it's easier to come out as an atheist, do you think?
Well, what I'm finding is that the more in our existence as an organization, we've made it more accessible for people to find us.
Right.
So the more we reach out, the more we meet people who are like, "Oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. I am so happy to see you here because, I'm the only Black atheist in my family." And so I think it has become somewhat easier for people to express their, even if they aren't non-believers, they can express their, dissatisfaction with religion and the church as a result of us being out there. And we're definitely noticing that more. We're noticing that there are more people within the Black community who are now starting to openly challenge the church and openly question religion in particular. They may not necessarily stop believing in God or identify as atheists. And again, this is historical. There have always been Black folks who have expressed their dissent and dissatisfaction with religion in the church. But yes, it is much more prevalent now.
And so, what are the greatest threats that religion or Christianity in particular pose to the Black community, at least where you are or in general?
Yes, so the greatest threat that I think it poses is that it still presents this false idea that the church is needed in our communities, and I don't think that is true at all. Sure, there are people who will probably never leave their churches. They find a sense of belonging and community, and I can certainly appreciate that, but I always ask, to what end? And there's also, it still pushes this narrative of a savior, that the Black community absolutely needs this big savior or this big thing to lead us through our problems. And
Something outside of themselves,
yes,
and
always something outside of ourselves, which gives way to putting trust in leaders and people who are very, very questionable, and they're putting their blind faith and trust in these people, and we see this quite a bit. We see this in a number of people who come in and assert themselves as leaders just to suck the resources from people for their own personal gain. And unfortunately, it becomes sort of easier to do that when you have a vulnerable population, when you have a vulnerable demographic that has been conditioned to needing this savior. And I think that is one of the most dangerous threats that the church poses, is that our communities absolutely still need these institutions for our survival, and that couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth.
mm. This is something that I've seen myself in, like, when I think about atheism, I find it to be an incredibly liberatory program, right? Just the idea is something that makes liberty possible. And it
Right.
sounds like that's what you're saying about your community, about yourself, and about the oppression that the church is putting on society. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, absolutely, it does. That is what I'm saying, and it doesn't mean that we won't have, varying. That doesn't mean we won't disagree on things, and one thing I will
or
say about
methods?
the black, yes, the methods and also the ideologies and also the perspectives, because there are a lot of folks who are against capitalism. There are some black folks who are for it, and sometimes we tend to do this all or nothing thing. You're either for or against it, and I think that's pretty unfortunate, because there have always been black folks of all kinds. There are black conservatives, there are black, of course there are black liberals, and there are black, just as there are, varying opinions, in even in white communities. The same is true, for black folks as well. And what I try to do is understand and respect people where they are, even if I don't agree, which is what I hope more within in the black community do for us, right? So they don't have to like that we don't believe in God, but it doesn't make us bad people. And
Yeah.
it actually, we actually show that we have more in common than not. And so, having this adherence to religion only can serve to be more divisive and keep people from, expanding their mind and their world, their outlook and their worldview, which a lot of younger people are now rejecting. They're now rejecting this notion of this fundamental, belief in our communities, because with more technology, with more access to information, they realize that they don't have to believe as much as they used to. So that's very, very important, to state. And there are many within the black community that are taking notice. They're taking notice of the fact that, there are more young people that are leaving their traditional, the faith or the religion of their parents and their grandparents. Yeah, I think definitely, having this idea that we absolutely, again, need this institution, and we have to depend on it, is one of the worst things that the black community can continue to reinforce.
I saw that you're a humanist celebrant. What is that, and what do you do? And so, and this breaks away from like what we're against, right? And
Right,
now let's move
right.
into like
Uh-huh.
how do we remake things, make the world in our image? So yeah, tell us about being a humanist celebrant.
Yes. So the one thing I've always, one of the good things that I have learned from being raised non-religious is that, again, religion in the church does not define, that they do not have the monopoly on community and what it means to have celebratory services. And so in my activism, I realized that it is important that, as we're building community, that more of our members and more people have access to services that aren't based in religion, that don't have a root in any sort of religious doctrine. And so, recently I became a humanist celebrant, so I can now perform weddings, funeral. I can preside over funerals. I can also do other ceremonies that, are more community based, that most people would see as being rooted in religion, but they aren't. So these kind of ceremonies predate religious belief. They're more communal, and I actually took the Humanist Celebrant course back in 2017, and I became certified through the Humanist Society and also Universal Life Church, which is a non-denominational entity, organization. One of the good things about it is that, as a humanist celebrant, and of course humanism is, a philosophy that, that as human beings we can change the world, that we can do good for the world without this idea of God hanging over us. And in that, we use more evidence based practices. And also, I contend that it's more meaningful, because you actually, in wedding ceremonies, you actually get to focus more on the couple and how, this realistic idea of love and what it entails, as opposed to this romanticized fairy tale idea, and also this subjugating idea of what it means to love, to serve. We can, we redefine that and do away with all of that. So it really is taking what is already there with community, and not just reinventing the wheel, because again, humanist practices and principles predate religion. So we're taking it back, I would say. And it's a good way for those who, again, who are fully atheists or humanists, or even those who are in between, who don't want an overly religious ceremony, for us to provide those services and make them more meaningful and more about the people at the at hand. And I think that this is very, very important, and that is also going to continue to grow as more people come out of religion, but they're still have living lives. People are still getting married. People are still creating families. People still need services for their loved ones, especially when they pass. And so, being a humanist celebrant allows me to expand on my activism by providing a needed service for that is needed in the everyday setting.
Mhm. Right, so we've kind of done the more formal interview. So we have this new fun, potentially fun session of sort of rapid fire questions on the theme of, can a true quote unquote atheist do a certain thing? So, for example, Mandisa, we're going to ask you some questions, and then you have to say whether a true atheist can do them. And of course,
Okay.
it's just sort of tongue in cheek, not
Sure.
totally serious.
Yeah.
So, can a true atheist say, "Oh my God," or "Jesus Christ"?
Yes, yes, they
Okay,
can.
okay.
Do you have a favorite exclamation that you use, and is it religious?
Sometimes I'll say Jesus tap dancing Christ. like I tend to say, like, oh my gosh, oh crap. I curse too. So sometimes I'll say, oh shit.
That's
You know
Right,
what I
that's
mean?
even
that
better.
works too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works too.
Yeah. Or sometimes I'll say, God damn it.
Mhm,
I am not afraid of blasphemy.
right,
Right.
It's probably one of my favorite things to do.
right.
I
Yes.
already like this part. Okay, how about, can a true atheist put up a Christmas tree?
Well, we do in our house, in our home. Christmas is actually a pagan holiday. It has pagan roots. So, yes, atheists can celebrate Christmas and receive gifts as well, and eat and drink and do all the fun things.
Mhm,
Except go to church. I mean, I
right.
wouldn't
Yeah.
advise people go to
Okay.
church
Well, you said
unless
all
you
the
want
fun
to.
things,
But
so
Mhm,
that's in there.
okay. How about this one? Can a true atheist believe in fate or destiny?
I would say that's kind of up in the air. I don't think that fate is a thing. Sometimes it's kind of like shit happens. But I think it's a bit disingenuous, but in a way, but people are on their own journeys. So it's there are times of uncertainty for sure, but I think that one is just a little that's kind of a little hokey for me.
Mm. So fate and destiny, hokey. How
Yeah.
about, can a true atheist practice meditation?
Yes, yes. Meditation is just sitting with yourself or a group of people and taking that time for yourself to just sort of, block out all thoughts, or just find that sense of peace and balance. So meditation is not I think the religious community or the spiritual community has hijacked this notion of meditation as if it's some sort of way to connect with God and the spirits. It's more of a way to connect with yourself and try to find that peace within.
How about, can a true atheist send their kids to Sunday school?
They can if they think if they want their children to learn more about religion comprehensively. I wouldn't recommend it though,
Right.
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
sending your kids intentionally to school or to Sunday school and religious services is exposing them to the very, very horrific teachings in the Bible. And it's just I sure they can do it in theory, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Is that something that your members, you or other members, struggle with? Like what to do with the kids on Sunday, or fighting with relatives about sending
Yeah,
them?
so most of yeah, they do tend to struggle with maybe a spouse who wants to take their children to church. They also struggle with whether they should expose their children to religious teachings, or whether they should learn about different religions and gods. And I grew up learning about different religions and gods and other beliefs. So I think that education is important. But yes, there is a more direct challenge with some of our members regarding whether their children should go to church, or whether they should go to church with their families.
Oh, wow, that's tricky. All right, let's
Hmm.
get back to an easier one. Can a true atheist say "bless you" if someone sneezes?
Uh, Probably out of force of habit. I mean, they're just words, so I don't think that I don't think that it revokes their atheist
Mhm.
card. But
Hmm.
there are certain
Yeah,
things that now, like, I try to say "gesundheit."
Mhm.
I try
Mhm.
to say,
totally.
"salute." I try to
Mhm.
Yeah.
make a good effort to not say those words. But if someone says it, because they're used to saying it, I won't disown them.
Right, right.
Yeah, no judgment, no judgment in
Right.
any of this.
How,
Yeah.
okay, here's a tough one. Can a true atheist date someone who's religious?
Yes. Yes, they can. Uh, a true atheist absolutely can do that. It's all about how people are and not necessarily what they believe, even if you disagree. There are a lot of religious people who are pretty open minded, and they're actually more open minded and better people than some atheists.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. Yep.
yeah, that's not me dumping on other atheists, of course, but people are people. And I think when people are able to find common ground, and despite their differences in religious perspectives, then that's a great thing. That's ideal.
Okay. Here's another one. Can a true atheist pray for their sports team to win a championship?
No. There is no true That's a hard stop right there.
Because of the
If
sports or because of prayer?
Well, because of both, but no. I mean, I'm a sport. I have nothing against sports, but it's the whole idea of praying. It's like, if you don't believe in a God, there's no God of football. There's no God watching to bless the other team, if you will. So no, no, a true atheist would not pray for their for their team to win. Now they may subscribe to some other lofty or funny superstitious thing, but even that, no, no, they would not pray.
Mhm.
All out.
Um,
Got it.
can a true atheist enjoy visiting, for example, St. Peter's in Rome or any kind of historical cathedral or things like this?
Absolutely, there are a lot of churches that are architecture. They're historical buildings, and we can appreciate we can appreciate the architecture of churches and the history of the buildings. There's a lot of lot I mean there was a lot of craftsmanship that was placed into these structures. So yes, we absolutely can.
Yeah. Okay. Can a true atheist believe in astrology?
No. No.
It's an easy one.
Not take that seriously. No. There are some, now I know some atheists who take astrology very seriously, but no, it has no basis in evidence, so I would say no.
Mm. All right. Okay, so last one. This is maybe the most difficult. Can a true atheist tell children that Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy don't exist?
I wouldn't recommend it. I think that children should be allowed that sense of imagination and that sense of creativity. I think that that isn't about atheism. That incorporates humanism. How is it that we raise? How are we raising our families? Um, you know, I think there are some atheists who will tell their children that Santa Claus isn't real, just like God isn't real. But I think that a good atheist would allow their children to find that out on their own. I would not just a good atheist would not just tell their children there is no God. They
Hmm.
would just tell them that we don't believe in them, and allow them to form their own conclusion, and to just instill that critical thinking process. So I don't think that a good atheist would do that.
Fantastic. All great answers. Oh, Mandisa, thank you so much for coming on today. This
Thank
was
you once again for
this was
having
amazing.
me.
All right, that was a lot of fun talking with Mandisa. Todd, what did you take away from the conversation?
Well, I think the big one is like you got to get out there and you got to do it, right? Like
Hmm.
that's what she
Hmm.
did. She wanted to form a group. She went out and she did it. Join a group, make it happen, put the work in. Related to that, though, like if you're joining a group or if you're a member, don't be a dick. Like that's the
Yes.
big one. Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
that's a
Like
good
we're
point.
we're all in this together. We all come from somewhere different, and like we have to embrace that difference, even with the world the way it is, right? Like, we're not going to purge the world of religious people. That's not what we're about. It's about standing up for ourselves and helping each other out. We need some sort of solidarity across atheism.
Hmm. Yeah. I thought it was interesting just when we were talking about sort of the different roles that non-religious organizations can play in terms of like, you know, building community or sort of advocacy or, religious, almost like sort of religious combat almost. But I mean, I feel like in some ways, I mean, like it seems like Black Nonbelievers as a group is sort of doing it all. um,
Yeah.
and I think, I mean, it is a difficult balance, I think, for secular groups, but it also, I mean, it seems like they're doing it successfully. And I think building community, I think, can be something like being part of a political project together. Like this doesn't need to be sort of separate things, but that can be part of what you do as a community. So that's sort of something I was thinking about from the conversation.
And I think it came up in it, right? Where she didn't go in ideologically programmed to think about this is what Black non-believers is going to be. This is what
Yeah.
an atheist group needs to be like. This is how we need to do things. It seems to have developed very organically into this sense of what is it that we need for each other? How do we provide it for each other? And then
Hmm.
build it around that, right?
Yeah,
How do
that's
we
that's
build
true.
each other up compared to how do we build each other up? How do we help liberate ourselves
Hmm.
rather than this notion of how do we constrain ourselves the way a church does and say, this is what you need to believe
Yeah.
and this is how you need to act. This is what you need to do. Otherwise you are bad. And to be constructive rather than extractive.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, I think it's like she saw a need for this kind of group and then sought to fill that need. Yeah, I mean it's pretty cool, and it's the tenth year of the group, which is pretty impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're organized with a lot of other groups. They believe they put on events as well. So one of them that's coming up is the Women of Color Beyond Belief. I think we've got a
Yes.
link for that in the
Yeah.
notes below.
Yep. That's
That'll be
in yeah.
amazing.
It's in September. I see. So yeah, yeah.
And of course, if you're looking for just a Black non-believers group, check out their website. They're all over the country. If there's not one in your town, make one.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're not a person of color, you can still be an ally. You can still get on Meetup and find a group in your neighborhood. And if there's not one, you can start one on Meetup. It's easy as pie.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although to be honest, some pies are pretty difficult to bake.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's work. You gotta put it in. I know it's tough, and we don't necessarily have time, and it's weird meeting people now. Have you started meeting people again, Nathan? Because it's weird.
Not yet. No. Well, not really. No.
I've been going out without a mask. I had a
Oh, right.
conversation in front of an elevator that everything that came out of my mouth was gibberish. It was that awkward, like talking to someone again.
Yeah. No,
But
that's true.
yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be strange when it opens up here.
All right. Anything else going on that you need to plug?
No, just to like and subscribe and rate and review the podcast. Yes.
Everybody, yeah, smash that like button. Pull the
Mm-hmm.
string.
Yep. Smash it.
Whatever else you need to do, smash it. Ring that bell.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah, get out, meet some people, organize, and then also read books. Books are great too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes.
Fantastic. This is another great one.
Yep.
Big thanks to Mandisa Thomas.
Yes.
Fantastic guest, doing great work. All right, Nathan.
Okay.
See you later.